English translation, 516th contact, Monday, the 14th of March 2011, 13:34 hours.
Hello, Eduard. Here I am. Unfortunately, I am 4 minutes late. But I like the music that comes out of your computer.
It also suits me. Greetings, my friend.
Glad you both could make it. Welcome and salutations. Yes, I also like this piece of music, which is why I listen to it sometimes, like just today, when I was waiting for you. It is a piece by the interpreter Edith Prock and is called, "Do You Hear the Bells of Stella Maria?"
Florina has told me that you have something urgent to discuss with Quetzal and me, which is why we are coming here today. Unfortunately, it was not possible to come here last Saturday for correction work because Bernadette was in Munich. I forgot about that when I made you the proposal for last Saturday.
It is the same with me. I had simply forgotten. But the reason why I urgently need to talk to you is not something I want to talk about openly, because it could cast a bad light on, but I am sure you have already noticed it yourself, since you are currently taking a look at all the study and national groups. One thing about the group in is actually the reason why I called you, because I need to be able to let you know by Wednesday at the latest. It is about now I want to know what you think should be done.
You are not telling us anything with this that we do not already know. We have already discussed this and decided together that such quarrels of group members cannot be tolerated, because they not only create discord, but also have a destructive effect on the group. This means that the member in question must be advised to refrain from his wrong behavior as soon as possible. Otherwise, he will have to be expelled from the group community.
This corresponds to what I said last night, when he called me and told me about the wrong behavior of... I advised him to advise the group in my advice that the board should give the offending group member an ultimatum of 1, 2, or 3 months to make the improper behavior disappear. And look here, this fax I just found when I came into my office. The president of the group already wants to resign because of the wrongdoer. It says here.
This clearly shows that action must be taken quickly. We came to the conclusion that the defective group member in question must be warned immediately in such a way that he or she is immediately expelled from the group without notice if there is also a single instance of cross-contamination. Your suggestion that an ultimatum of 1, 2, or 3 months should be issued. We do not think this is appropriate because the way things stand and the way you have now described them to us, rapid and radical action is needed.
This is of correctness, because nothing would change for the better if we were to stand by and watch for a longer period of time. Immediate action must be taken.
Good. Then I will pass on your decision to. He can then inform the board of the group. But now I wonder why you are investigating all FIGU groups.
The whole thing has its purpose in that we want to get an orientation about the general state of affairs in all groups. But this is not something we do over and over again. It is based on a decision of our committee, which wants to have clarity about how things are currently going in the different groups. Unfortunately, in the course of these clarifications, we have discovered several things which are not in accordance with the FIGU consciousness. And therefore we want to tell you the faulty things in question, but which you should keep to yourself for the time being, and only tell us if it becomes necessary for you to give advice.
And I want to say that your advice is as good as ours.
Thanks for your trust.
Then I will now mention the facts that we found out about the individual groups and group members during our investigations. After that, I have to go back to my duties. But you should not talk about that now, because the individual groups and group members have to find their own correct way. I think it is necessary for you to inform Bernadette about what we have found in relation to, because it is very important for her to be able to behave correctly towards.
It should be a recommendation to her.
I am sure she will not be very happy.
She will have to accept that.
Then I will go now and say goodbye, my friend.
Also, friend, farewell and goodbye. And away he is. Do you have some more time, Ptaah? Because I have written a new call to all the human beings of the earth. The first part is new, while the second part is a quote from an earlier letter to the human beings and those responsible for the earth.
The time necessary for this is at my disposal. Also, I only have to read what you have rewritten.
There it is in the computer. It will also be published in an open letter in April and sent to various governments. You can read.
To all human beings, those responsible and governing the earth.
Already in 1951, twice in 1958 and 1959, and in the 1960/70ths and 1980s. I wrote various letters to the governments and those in positions of responsibility, as well as to well-known newspapers and radio stations around the world, mentioning in prophecies and predictions what is in store for the earth and its humanity if something drastic is not done immediately to combat the constantly growing overpopulation. This is because the machinations of the overpopulation are causing enormous changes on Earth, its climate and nature, which are leading to severe climate change and enormous natural disasters. There have also been warnings that war, revolution and dictatorship, as well as the destructive forces of nature, will cause enormous masses of people to flee from their oppressed and impoverished homelands to the industrialized countries, causing serious political, economic, social and anti-social and religious problems, etc. And it has also been stated that this will be the responsibility of those in power and those in positions of responsibility, and of all humanity on Earth, with the authorities and their superiors in the front line, as well as many scientists. Unfortunately, no one has listened to my words for some 60 years, but they have not been laughed at or kept quiet, and consequently nothing has been done about the constant growth of overpopulation, which is causing all the various problems that exist throughout the Earth to proliferate and to degenerate into the present context. And in order to counter these degenerations, not a single measure is being taken by those in power, by those in positions of responsibility, or by human beings in general to stop the further increase in overpopulation and thus give the world and its nature the opportunity to slowly reduce the damage caused to it by humanity. It is true that the terrible things that have happened and will happen in the future in a far worse way cannot be reversed and cannot be stopped. But if correct action is finally taken, then a useful return to normal and healthy behavior of the climate and nature is also possible, as well as the solution of all the serious political, social, and anti-social problems. But this requires that real action be taken to confront and counter all the evils and problems. This, instead of holding senseless, stupid and useless climate conferences and discussing and deciding stupidities that cannot be greater, because the effective reality and its truth are not perceived and not understood. This also includes constantly new taxes for the alleged climate protection, which are imposed on the citizens but which are wasted senselessly. The basic problem of all climate and nature destruction and the resulting primeval natural disasters and the future threatening hyperstorms, respectively primeval storms, superstorms and megastorms are only to be found in the overpopulation, through whose manifold destructive machinations the entire natural course and the inner life of the earth is disturbed, destroyed, and will become even worse in the future. The weight of the entire mass of humanity and its buildings and reservoirs, as well as the enormous masses of animals used to produce food, also disturb the inner life of the Earth. This is because the pressure of this enormous global weight pressing on the inner life of the Earth is causing too much pressure to be exerted on the continental plates, resulting in more and dangerous shifts of the plates, which is leading to more and more catastrophic earthquakes and seaquakes and huge tsunamis. This, while the earth and seaquakes also contribute to triggering volcanic eruptions and causing further disasters. A fact that is vehemently denied by megalomaniac experts, just as volcanic eruptions can cause further volcanic eruptions around the world through their internal vibrations alone. And since the human beings of the Earth are so reckless as to build and operate their homes, nuclear power stations and many other buildings close to sea, lake and river shores instead of at least 70 meters above sea level, as well as in areas at risk of earthquakes and floods, it is inevitable that homes, factories and nuclear power stations, etc., will be affected, damaged or even destroyed. In the case of such nuclear power stations, there is already the risk that a major or supermajor accident could be caused by faulty switching or other influences, as has been demonstrated in Chernobyl and now also in Japan. And that nature is contaminated by radioactivity, and that the human beings are also contaminated by the radiation, become terminally ill and die because they get cancer, while pregnant women who come into the area of radiation give birth to freaks. This is only an inevitable consequence. This fact cannot be denied, nor can it be denied that nuclear power plants destroyed by a meltdown release atomic particles into the air, which, depending on the wind conditions, contaminate large areas as dangerous radiation and also spread around the world and fall to Earth with precipitation, which in this way also contaminates much of the atmosphere. And if such things happen, then certain governments and scientists around the world make big words and speeches, claiming that the same cannot happen in their country and that everything is being re-examined and updated to ensure that there is no possibility of a catastrophic or super-catastrophic event. Such words and speeches are not only hollow and empty, but also simple-minded, and they serve only to reassure the population and to promote the image of the irresponsible governments and scientists in question. The truth is that the rulers who spread their nonsense through newspapers, TV and radio, etc., understand next to nothing about physics and especially about nuclear technology, but they try to cover up this ignorance with stupid pseudo-declarations. Of course, humanity needs electrical energy because most of today's technology is geared to it. So there is also a need for energy-producing plants in relation to electricity, although the large demand at present can really only be met by nuclear power stations. This does not mean, however, that such nuclear power plants are designed and developed or can be manufactured in such a way, in terms of safety, that accidents cannot happen with them, because terrestrial nuclear energy technology is far from sufficient for this, and will also never be sufficient. But until a new and clean energy technology for the generation of electrical energy is invented and implemented, nuclear power plants are unfortunately still unavoidable. So it is imperative that other clean and also not CO2 emitting technologies are considered for electrical power generation, such as coal, gas and oil-fired power plants. Clean power plants for electrical power generation are thus practically left to wind, water and solar radiation, at least until other clean power generation options are invented or developed. In particular, The use of heat from deep within the Earth by means of large thermal power stations should be aimed at as a clean energy generation technology, as this would solve all the Earth's problems with regard to electricity. This would also enable all road and water transport to be powered by electrical energy without harmful emissions into the air and environment. Vehicles and machinery of all kinds, etc., with internal combustion engines would finally disappear from the scene. But why the smart energy scientists, as well as all the responsible governments, etc., have not yet come up with this solution, one really wonders. Huge heat power plants, which could use the heat from the Earth's interior, would actually solve all the energy problems of earthly mankind, and this without producing pollutants and without the danger of a global or superglobal. However, the vast majority of the earthly humanity, which should not be more than about 529 million human beings, is not only leading to ever worse catastrophes in nature, but also to more and more degenerated machinations among the human beings themselves. Thus, for example, acts of war of all kinds are becoming more and more frequent, and genocides, respectively genocides, are also part of it. Unemployment is also on the rise, as the mechanization of work processes means that fewer and fewer people are needed to do the work. But human vices of all kinds are also on the increase, such as drug addiction, crime and criminality, as well as the ever-increasing shortage of drinking water and food, which is getting worse and worse and is getting more and more out of control. The same applies to evils such as epidemics and diseases, the degeneration of good interpersonal relationships, and the increasingly precarious and evil family relationships. Because the human beings are no longer being raised in a righteous manner to be valuable human beings, but to degenerate into antisocial savages who are not afraid to spread fear, terror, and violence. And it is precisely in this respect that the human beings in the great mass of overpopulation are becoming increasingly indifferent, inhumane, full of hatred and thoughts of retribution and revenge. There are cries for the death penalty and war. Those of different faiths are vilified, while evil terrorism, suicide bombings, racial discrimination and suicides are on the increase, etc. And it is primarily the governments and other responsible parties worldwide who are called upon to stop, and ultimately eradicate all these aberrations. But the less the world's governments and leaders do something in this regard, the greater and more widespread will be the evils which dominate the human beings of the earth and which also affect the climate and nature. It is up to those who govern and are responsible, as well as to individuals and the whole of humanity, to take all necessary steps to counter all evils in a correct manner and, in time, to bring them under control and make them disappear. This also means that all forms of torture and the death penalty must be abolished, and that wars must not be a reality, but nipped in the bud. And if those in positions of power do wish to wage war, or advocate the death penalty, which is also equivalent to torture, or otherwise act and enforce injustice, then such elements should be immediately removed from office and replaced by persons who can guarantee that the laws and recommendations of creation and nature are maintained and observed. A military army may be well and good for the defense of the country, but never for attacking foreign states and leading them into war. And consequently, no military of a country may also assist other warring states and provide them with combat troops, etc. A military army may exist only in self-defense for its own country, and it may never invade a foreign state for its own interests in order to wage war there for its own profit. The world's leaders and leaders of the world must therefore be concerned to abolish all such abuses and inhumanities, such as the death penalty, torture, racism, religious hatred and war, etc. An army should only exist as an international peacekeeping force with 100,000 or million soldiers, which intervenes immediately worldwide and stops all emerging acts of war if any break out somewhere in a state. This fact alone may be enough to ensure that no warlike machinations are launched in the countries, because it is known that immediately a huge superiority of world security forces in the form of 100,000 or million international peacekeeping force would intervene and nip the warfare in the bud and stop it. What is urgently needed, however, is first and foremost to drastically stop the further growth of the overpopulation by means of a worldwide controlled birth control. Because the more people there are on Earth, the greater and more comprehensive all the problems among the human beings themselves, as well as in relation to the destruction of the climate and nature, and consequently the problems, and indeed all of them, the longer and the more insoluble they become. Already in 1951, and also in 1958/59, and in the 1970s and 1980s, I spoke to the leaders of authorities and governments, and more generally to the human beings of the earth, with prophetic and predictive exhortations, but they were not listened to. It is now 66 years since the inglorious end of the Second World War, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, and cost the lives of some 62 million people, and caused immense suffering, hardship, pain, and destruction in many countries. Even nuclear energy was used to murder hundreds of thousands of human beings and destroy their cities. Through the irresponsible and criminal action of the USA, when the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by nuclear bombs. Unfortunately, however, all this was not the end of all the horrors. Mass murders, wars, and acts of terrorism, because the human beings of all peoples were not wise, but have since continued in the same vicious and destructive way. Everything has got much worse since then, because the ever-increasing mass of humanity has also destroyed nature and the climate in immeasurable measure, against which those in power should have taken action with special responsibility. But all around the world, the greedy governments were in no way able to change anything for the better, and the peoples themselves were not prepared to remove the fallible rulers from office and let them seize the hare's banner to replace them with ignorant people. I had already wrote earlier, in the 1950s,
It is the folks in every country who elect the rulers, usually, unfortunately, the false ones, who make great promises and then, when they are in power, they make war and terror, and then they bombard the people with lies and deception, making them servile to their superiors and misunderstanding the real truth. But this will have evil consequences in the future, because all over the world, if the people do not intervene, the powers of the state will involve the human beings more and more in wars, terror, and hatred, until the whole thing takes on uncontrollable forms all over the world. The time is not far off, for already these monstrous things are smoldering in a smoldering fire, which will become an open fire in the years to come. It is still time to stop the monstrous thing that has been prophesied for the future of all earthly humanity and for the earth and its nature. There is still time for effective countermeasures to change everything for the better. If the peoples and all those responsible in governments, authorities, the scientific and military communities, and all those otherwise responsible make the utmost effort to stop all evils and bring about positive change. If this is not done, unimaginable horrors are on the horizon, with the United States of America, the world power, in every respect in the forefront, leading the sword of death, destruction and annihilation, and also Israel and all those states which will cuddle up to the United States in hypocritical friendship against the will of a reasonable section of the people. The future will be marked not only by wars, terror, destruction and annihilation with thousands of deaths and hundreds of thousands of murdered people, but also by an enormous overpopulation, through whose fault all the laws of nature will be thrown off course. All storms will increase through the fault of the human being and take on ever more powerful forms, such as hailstorms, blizzards, and floods of rain, but also the ozone layer will be very dangerously damaged. Monstrous floods will become more and more the order of the day because overpopulation will turn the floodplain forests and floodplain plains into residential areas, and the wild waters of the rain floods will make their way into the homes of the human beings because they can no longer escape into uninhabited floodplain areas. Landslides and avalanches, as well as earthquakes and seaquakes, and storms of all kinds will be rampant. Hurricanes and typhoons, hurricanes and tornadoes will increase in number and become ever more powerful and destructive. And overpopulation will also be to blame, because overpopulation will cause tremendous negative effects, and thus unnatural climate change, which, in just a decade from now, will begin to have a very negative impact on the world. The immense masses and weights of cities and villages will continue to plague the internal structures of the Earth, affecting the tectonics, which will inevitably lead to increased tectonic shifts and distortions, which will cause enormous earthquakes throughout the world, with hundreds of thousands and millions of deaths. And these earthquakes also have an influence on the entire earthly volcanism, consequently also on the volcanoes, which are often connected with each other worldwide. Note Billy 2011, vibrationally, and which are becoming more and more frequently and destructively active. This will also claim many human lives, especially in those areas where homes are unreasonably built too close to the volcanoes, as is the case on beaches of seas, on large rivers and lakes, where construction is taking place directly on the shores, which will be flooded by storm waves and tidal waves on a massive scale and will claim many human lives. But it is not enough, because the ever-increasing overpopulation, which in 50 years' time, note Billy 2011, from the 1950s onwards, will have grown to over 6 billion as predicted, will give rise to many immense and insoluble problems. Famines will increase, while old and eradicated diseases will return. Mass tourism from industrialized countries will flood them with economic refugees from all over the world. And a huge problem of asylum seekers will also become insoluble. And it is predicted that by the end of the 1980s, the boom will collapse, and there will be an unprecedented level of unemployment worldwide, with crime by the unemployed rising, as well as by criminal gangs from the so-called third world countries who are spreading in the industrialized countries, and who will not even shy away from murder when they pursue their crimes. Public debt is also rising immensely, as are terrorist extremism and neo-Nazism, etc. Prostitution, it has been predicted, is taking on incredible forms and is becoming so widespread in the world that even children are not spared. In the coming decades, prostitution will become an honorable profession, officially recognized by the authorities and also subject to taxation. The already invented television will be part of every family's everyday life, as well as the technology of computers, which is already being worked on in America, Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union. Television and computers will become the most important information media, but also the most important forms of public prostitution advertising. Over the next 50 years, note Billy, 2011, calculated from the 1950s onwards, the human beings will become cold in their thoughts and feelings, so that interpersonal relationships will bear ever stranger blossoms and will become purely functional. True love will become a rarity, and many marriages will only take place to indulge in a certain status, which is traded for prestige and money. The bottom line will be that many marriages will not last, families will be destroyed, and the offspring will be sexually abused, as well as becoming antisocial and neglected. People, especially the young ones, will begin to live a life already at the end of the 50s, which is often only oriented towards drugs. And later, when the time of the 80s is approaching, the drug problem will get out of hand. But also, only pleasure will be of importance, and destructive and disharmonic sounds will dominate the world of music, which will affect the psyche and the whole behavior of those human beings who orientate themselves towards this destructive kind of music will fall into the negative. In the field of sectarianism, more and more people are appearing who are supposedly chosen by God, who financially exploit their believers, enslave them, and even drive them to suicide. Irresponsible people will use the time to get rich through their believers, especially if they spread fear and terror about the millennium, because, as they will claim, the world will end in the year 2000. They are not afraid to spread lies that extraterrestrials will save the chosen ones, but only if they hand over large sums of money to the cult leaders. Much more is brought about by the growing overpopulation, which is basically the real origin of all evil things in the future, because the larger the overpopulation becomes, the more enormous the resulting problems become. Thus, new epidemics will appear, already in the coming 80s, which will claim millions of human lives. Epidemics which are transmitted from animals to the human beings, as in more distant times, also epidemics which are brought from the space of the world to the earth. But all this, that the epidemics originate from animals and spread to the human beings, will be denied by those responsible, and those who know the real truth will be slandered as liars. If in this way the world and its humanity is ruined, then the human being of the earth is himself the author of this, whereby he creates the real cause by driving his overpopulation into ever higher numbers. Thus, it will not be an imaginary God of any religion or sect that determines the immense problems and excesses to come, but only the human being of the earth, who in his delusion believes himself to be the highest and most powerful being in the universe, far higher than creation can ever be. Through the guilt of the human being, through his overpopulation, through his megalomania, through his irrationality and self-importance, he challenges all the forces of nature, which rise up together with the earth, and resist the degenerating machinations of the earth humans. Thus the forces of nature overflow on earth together with the earth itself, because the human being disrupts and destroys the entire natural course of the elements and life. All this I have to say, for it is the prophetic and predictive truth. Please, all of you who hear these words of mine, have the courage to think over what has been said and to draw the right conclusions and to act correctly, because there is still time to do so, but it is already beginning to slip between your fingers. Consider this prophecy and prediction and act in the sense of a change for the better. Make everything also public for all the human beings of the earth, through teachings in all media, in order to achieve a change and transformation in a positive sense, and to protect the earth and all of its humanity from all the evil, from all the degeneration, the many deaths and destructions, and from the step into destruction. All of you who receive my letter have the opportunity, the power, and the responsibility to save the earth and its humanity from all that I have revealed to you. Do not hesitate, but act, and act quickly, for time is short. If you do not act promptly, then you are just as responsible when the prophecy is fulfilled as all those who will ensure its fulfillment in the future. The 13th of March, 2011, Sim Ya-se, Silver Star Center. Billy Edward Albert Meyer.
What you have written is good and correct. But I think that it is as little noticed and accepted by Earth humans as all your previous calls are not, which you have written and spread during the last 60 years.
I know, but I still have to try. But enough of that. What about next Saturday for the correction work?
It should be that next Saturday we make up for what we missed last Saturday. Otherwise, the discussion reports will pile up unpleasantly high again.
But now I have another question. You no longer make any predictions. It is completely pointless because the Earth humans do not listen to them. Rather, they proceed in the traditional contexts with all evils, and thereby trigger more and more catastrophes. A serious seaquake of the strength of 9 has now occurred in Japan, and a tsunami which has arisen from that has caused a giant catastrophe, whereby entire villages and towns were simply washed away and everything was razed to the ground. Various atomic reactors have thereby also been involved, whereby it is unavoidable that atomic radiation is discharged, that it contaminates much, also human beings, and will cost the lives of human beings. Also thereby to fear is that the radiation is caused to drift a great distance and also contaminates land, plants, and living things far beyond the death zones. The radiation can reach not only far into the north and south of Japan, rather also to China and across the Pacific to the USA, and finally, depending on the wind conditions, also right around the world. And there is certainly no question that again thousands of human beings have lost their lives, because nothing else is possible consistent with the primeval devastation which the tsunami has caused. That only a few dozen or several hundred human beings were killed, as is asserted, certainly does not correspond to the truth. My question in regard to that is whether I am correct with these assumptions, and also thereby that many more human beings will be killed or become sick with cancer and lose their lives as a result of the nuclear radiation. I would also like to know what you have to say in regard to the safety of atomic power plants and atomic reactors, as they are built and operated here on the Earth. You did already say around 25 years ago in a private conversation, when the Chernobyl disaster occurred, that there is no effective safety for such atomic energy generation facilities, and that the human beings of Earth also could never create such atomic facilities in this respect, which could provide absolute safety. Also to say is that our geologists and all those who concern themselves with seaquakes and earthquakes still continue to make no distinction between seaquakes and earthquakes, although these are two different forms of quakes. Can you just say something in a simple language which is understandable for me and also all other laypersons?
That which you say corresponds to reality. Seaquakes give rise to faults in the ocean floor and movements of water which form into simple or manifold tsunamis and evoke much worse destruction than earthquakes, which are geared towards mere destructions caused by tremors, fissures in the earth and superficial cracks, and by the ground shifting. Seaquakes therefore correspond to a completely different form than earthquakes. Florina and Injana have taken the trouble to clarify. On site at the affected areas in Japan, that which has occurred concerning the human beings who have lost their lives. There are many thousands who were beyond saving, buried under mud and rubble, or were pulled out into the ocean with the retreating masses of water. It is too late to save them, aside from a few. And what there is to say about that which you say, in regard to the atomic power plants, is that right from the beginning when the first power plant of this kind was built, no safety at all was provided, and it was completely irresponsibly dealt with. There can never be absolute safety provided for atomic power plants. As we know from our own experience when our forefathers used the same unsafe technology for obtaining energy, whereby it was very much more developed than is the case with the current terrestrial atomic technology. Such atomic power plants, often with several reactors, were operated until an unparalleled nuclear disaster occurred worldwide, when, as a result of malfunctions resulting from unexpected external cosmic influences, a great number of reactors burst, which claimed the lives of more than 48 million human beings. Something on the same or similar scale can also happen on the Earth. because atomic reactors can never be so controlled that no accident or mishap can occur. There are, in fact, sooner or later, always influences which lead to a smaller or greater catastrophe. If nothing of the kind happens, then one can talk of pure luck. With our forefathers, a new energy-obtaining technology, which could absolutely guarantee safety, was only created after a worldwide catastrophe was caused by bursting atomic reactors, as a result of which gigantic areas were contaminated with nuclear radiation for a very long time. In regard to an atomic power plant technology which could prevent all disturbance of any dangerous kind from coming about as a result of any influences, there is no guarantee because too many factors exist in this relationship, meaning that a destructive malfunction, and thereby a catastrophe, can arise. The greatest danger of all is formed by unpredictable human failures in regard to careless technical faults as well as cosmic influences, as with dangerous destructive radiations which issue from the solar structures. Meteorites are also factors which can trigger a destruction of nuclear power plants and their atomic reactors. Therefore, not only earthquakes and seaquakes have to be taken into consideration, rather also the named possibilities as well as faulty functions of facilities, and also incalculable harmful consequences as a result of the nuclear fuel itself, which, above all, means a constant danger, as do its waste products. All this, along with cooling agents which can fail as a result of certain chemical changes to the Kernverbindungseinflusses, a fact which is still completely unknown to the operators and specialists of terrestrial atomic energy. And even when water is used for cooling, it can lose its consistency and become steam, which develops a monstrous explosive power, as can also be the case with pure chemical coolants. Even the best cooling systems provide no absolute safety for cooling the fuel elements if an accident happens. But there are also yet other dangerous factors, which are not borne in mind because these are not known to the atomic physicists, and so forth, because they simply do not think far enough and do not search for other forms of causes which contain dangers. So therefore something unpleasant, dangerous, and destructive, and even a catastrophe can always happen unexpectedly. And even if the state of atomic technology on the Earth were much higher, that would change nothing regarding the danger of atomic power plants and their atomic reactors, because they are unpredictable in one way or another in regard to many kinds of things, which would still not be recognized in regard to terrestrial nuclear technology. And the danger does not only consist of that, because the greatest danger exists in the fact that radioactivity is emitted and spreads out and contaminates very much over a very long time, and even over hundreds of thousands of years and many millions of years. And indeed, regardless of whether the radiation contaminates everything in small or big amounts. It is fundamentally irresponsible to use nuclear power plants to generate energy. Consequently, they should be strictly prohibited. And that does not only concern atomic power plants in the large context, as in the obtaining of electric energy for the population, rather it also concerns small nuclear power plants with atomic reactors, as for example in submarines and so forth.
This is clearly stated, but the Earthlings have already built and are operating hundreds of nuclear power stations and reactors worldwide in their nuclear power mania. And if they were to suddenly shut them all down, there would be a drastic worldwide energy shortage. In fact, there are far too few power stations powered by renewable energy sources to cover the entire energy demand. So other power stations must first be created and built to replace all the nuclear power stations. But that will take a long time yet, because the scientists and experts in charge are too stupid to develop absolutely pollution-free and completely safe energy power stations. Just as your ancestors did with regard to thermal power stations, as I once heard from your daughter Simya say. She explained that deep down in the Earth's core, Heat was being tapped into and used to run huge heat power plants that could supply all the energy needs on your planet before any other clean energy creation techniques were developed. There was no hazardous waste, and there were not the kind of GAs and super GAs that were seen in your former nuclear power stations, and that are also inevitably seen in the nuclear power stations here on Earth. This is in addition to minor nuclear accidents which are not made known to the public, which is only informed when a major catastrophe occurs, such as in Japan and 25 years ago in Chernobyl. And if an accident, respectively a nuclear power plant disaster occurs, the population is lied to by those responsible for nuclear power plants and by the governments. And it is also these moments when governments all over the world speak out loudly and hypocritically, and cry out for risk assessments, safety measures, nuclear power plant closures, etc., which they do out of cowardly fear, but also deceitfully, meanly, and hypocritically in order to score points with the people for the next elections, in the hope of being re-elected to office. It has always been the case that every misfortune, every accident, and every catastrophe has been used and exploited for their own benefit and profit by certain governments and economic bosses, as well as by corporations and, in general, by many persons, and effectively in the sense that, if it brings personal gain, since time immemorial corpses have been ruthlessly thrown over corpses. And of course, the people howl with these wolves. But then everything is quickly forgotten when the catastrophe is over and all ills have passed and personal gain has been made. And so the people continue to muddle along in the old frame and style, just as it has always been. This is exactly how it turns out that all the greasy, loudmouth talk of the rulers in question was null and void and not a lie. And those of the rulers and the people who are against the use of nuclear technology in relation to nuclear power stations of all kinds and against nuclear weapons, etc., are simply shouted dead or sent to oblivion by the pro-nuclearists so that they can no longer bother with their legitimate concerns. But the nuclear energy lobby is not only made up of the operators of nuclear power stations, and many of the governments crying out for nuclear power stations. It also includes many of the people who truly have no idea of the dangers of nuclear technology. And so all those mentioned above are also not aware that, for example, if the sun suddenly goes crazy and throws enormous amounts of radiation towards the Earth, all electrical equipment, appliances, generators, pumps, and machines, etc. can suddenly break down and paralyze the cooling systems of the nuclear reactors. And if such a thing happens, then a worldwide nuclear catastrophe will occur when the nuclear reactors blow up. It is likely that the reactor cooling systems in nuclear power stations have their own power supply, but as you once said, the enormous radiation from the sun can also cause them to fail.
That is indeed possible.
But neither the nuclear power plant operators, nor the nuclear physicists, nor the governments, nor even the people are thinking of that.
That is indeed the case. And in their ignorance, irresponsibility, and magnanimity, they deny all the possibilities mentioned above, which could trigger small and large catastrophes when nuclear reactors explode and contaminate large areas for a very long time. It was like that in Chernobyl, as you said, and it will also be like that in Japan. And if not all nuclear power stations worldwide with their nuclear reactors are shut down and dismantled, then it is only a question of time when a great and worldwide nuclear catastrophe will befall the Earth and the terrestrial humanity, which can then claim millions of human lives.
They play with fire like ignorant children who have not yet burned their fingers in a fire.
Yes, you can put it that way and use it for comparison.
Can I ask you something else about the uprising in Libya?
Of course, if they are not predictive things, because we do not make predictions anymore, as you know, I know.
No, I don't want predictions. But the point is that in the case of Libya, it would be appropriate that an international, respectively multinational peacekeeping force according to the Hennock system would be useful, wouldn't it?
In the existing case of Libya and the dictatorship ruling there by the unpredictable, megalomaniac and otherwise insane man Gaddafi, an invasion of an international peacekeeping force under the Hennock system would be necessary and justified. Such an invasion would be justified everywhere in every country that invades other states by war for any reason, or whose rulers use violence against their own people.
Such an international peacefighting force is, so to speak, a world army consisting of military personnel from all states, the army being 1 million men or several million, depending on the mass of the largest population of a country. Thus, the number of soldiers in such a world army must be so large that it is twice as large as the existing army of the most militarily powerful state. When a country threatens war against another, or starts warlike and otherwise violent attacks against its own population, the International Peace Corps, respectively, the World Army must immediately, without long negotiations and without pardon, enter the country in question with a single or, if necessary, a double or triple military power compared to that of the country in question, in order either to nip the fighting in the bud or to end it when it has already broken out. Only in this way can the worst really be prevented, which also means that the fallible rulers of all kinds are stripped of their power and sent into exile for life. Even a single, double, or even triple superiority of a world army, respectively, an international peacekeeping force can lead to. A situation where the fallible rulers of a crisis area take up arms and without fighting the whole thing comes to a bloodless end. This has also often happened with the peacekeeping forces of Henoch.
This is correct. But it is not yet feasible on Earth, because for the realization of such an international peacekeeping force, it is necessary that many states are uniformly responsible for such a world army. But this is not yet feasible on Earth at the present time, because too many states still refuse to do so and do not want to place themselves under a world security organization, but only want to act on their own authority and for their own profit. Although some states may, in certain cases, join together to form multinational troop units, this is in no way equivalent to a multinational peacekeeping force. For such troop units are actually war-fighting forces which are not designed for pacification, but solely for bloody, life-threatening, and destructive combat operations. This, whereas a multinational peacekeeping force must be careful not to claim human lives and not to cause destruction. And if, inevitably, human lives must be sacrificed and destruction must be wrought, then this will be done on a very small scale, with due regard for the protection of human lives and human achievements, and also only in such a way that only combat forces are decimated, and only combat vehicles, combat installations, and combat command centers, etc. are destroyed. Civilians, civilian buildings, civilian installations, hospitals, and refugee camps, and all things which do not fall within the military sphere must not be attacked in any way and must not be damaged. In the old days, when our peoples waged wars, these rules were strictly adhered to, so there were only deaths among the combat forces and destruction under military ordnance, combat vehicles, buildings, and command posts. The multinational peacekeeping forces, when they were created and intervened as quickly as possible without long negotiations and with a single or multiple superiority wherever wars were threatening or where domineers were oppressing their own people or were using violence against them, very quickly brought peace to everything. The mere knowledge that the multinational peacekeeping forces would intervene immediately in the event of any crises and acts of violence led to a situation in which states and tyrants refrained from engaging in war against other states or harassing their own people, etc. The whole thing also led to the individual rulers quickly relinquishing power to the people, who set up governments close to the people so that only the will of the people was valid and had to decide everything.
Unfortunately, it will probably take a long time before this kind of thinking is practiced on Earth and an international peacekeeping force is created in the framework of the above-mentioned project. So far, there is not even a thought in this direction, but everything is only aimed at malicious bloodshed and the best possible destruction. And this is also the case with multinational forces and their deployment. The Earthlings call the will of the people democracy, but the fact is that nevertheless the rulers can decide many things at their own discretion. There is also a party system, which you once called a party dictatorship, which should not exist, nor should it be possible for the rulers to decide things at their own discretion, and to pass laws, taxes, etc., for which the people then have nothing to say.
Unfortunately, it is as you say, for first the human beings must develop reason and reason in such a way that they understand these things. But this will take a long time yet because Earth humans still think and act like underage children in the above-mentioned relationship, but they think they are very grown-up and clever. Earth humans have not yet reached the point where they are able to exercise correct understanding and reason in this way, because they are still trapped in their own power behavior and do not understand what a real democracy means. But now it is time for me to leave again, because I have various jobs that I still have to do today. Goodbye, Eduard.
So be it, farewell. But wait, maybe it would be good if you explained something about a true democracy.
I can do that on occasion, but there is not enough time today.
I also did not think that it should be today, but sometime in the future.
Well then, goodbye.